Hey there, everybody. Welcome. And thanks for attending this special webinar about the Band NC program. I'm Leslie Boney, Director of the Institute for Emerging Issues, and we're part of a team that's leading this grant program. And today, we're going to look at what the program's about, how it fits with other efforts that are going on across the state to increase connectivity, particularly the ability to connect in the home. We're going to talk about who's eligible. We're going to talk about the digital divide and try to sort through the term digital inclusion. Our agenda, this is the welcome part that you're hearing now. Then we're going to set the stage, give you a little bit of information about what's going to happen during the webinar today. Then we're going to delve into the details, and then we're going to take your questions. So this should be a good interactive program. You can ask your questions through the chat box or through Q&A, and we absolutely welcome your questions and insights. We'll get to as many of them as we can. You should know that this webinar is also being recorded and will be accessible on our website later this week. So please feel free to share this with other people. Let them know that you participated. If you want them to see it a little bit later, it'll be on our website. We hope that you'll leave with a deeper understanding of the program, a commitment to work with others in your county to take the next step toward addressing the digital divide in your county by undertaking what we call digital inclusion. First, a little bit of background. The Institute for Emerging Issues at NC State is a public service organization, and since 1986 we've been looking for issues that are either hitting North Carolina over the head or lurking around the corner, trying to anticipate things that are going to be important to North Carolina, and then bringing people together to develop strategies to address them. Back in February, we had a big meeting in Raleigh where we talked about the critical importance of having broadband available everywhere, particularly in the home. There will come a time, we said, when it's going to be essential to have broadband in every home in the state so that young people and adults can learn, adults can work from home, seniors can get health care from home, people can do banking from home. And we laid out a number of cases where this was going to be really important. What we didn't know was that that time would begin the next month. And today we're all in it. Today everyone understands the importance of this issue, but we don't have a clear path to get there, to solve this problem in a long-term way. And the Institute for Emerging Issues, working with the State Broadband Infrastructure Office and some partners, wants to help communities across the state develop those pathways. So today's program is possible because of our partners and our sponsors. First, our principal partner, the North Carolina Broadband Infrastructure Office, but also these foundations and organizations that have said this matters to them and have invested in this so that we can get grants out to you across the state. The John M. Belk Endowment, the Roanoke Electric Cooperatives, North Carolina Electric Cooperatives, and ATMC are all really important sponsors of this program, and we thank them for making it possible. So let's get started. We want to start off talking about what digital inclusion is and why it matters. And to do that, we wanted to hear from the state's leading expert on that subject, Amy Huffman with the State Broadband Infrastructure. Amy, welcome, and thanks for being part of the webinar, and thanks for being part of this project.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Amy, let's start out with a definition of digital inclusion, what it is and why it matters. Can you help us?
Sure. So digital equity is our goal. So we want to make sure that North Carolina is a digitally equitable state. So everyone has access to the technologies, the tools, the infrastructure, and the skills to use the internet to thrive in the 21st century. And digital inclusion then is how we get there. It's the programs, it's the policies, it's the tools, it's the people on the ground, helping train folks, helping give out computers, and all sorts of those sorts of things that help us get to a digitally equitable state. This is the technical definition that we use for digital inclusion. I won't read it here because I assume everyone can read it, but that's basically what digital inclusion is.
Yeah, interesting. One of the first chats is just to clarify that this is not just accessible broadband, but it's affordable broadband. That's an important element of what we're talking about. Can you just give us a sense of where we are right now? Where does North Carolina stand? And I realize it varies by the part of the state that we're in, but let's talk about maybe some barriers and then a little bit about where North Carolina is.
Sure. So, North Carolina, in terms of access, we have about 94.97% of our households have access to broadband at the speed that's defined by the Federal Communications Commission at 25 megabits download, 3 megabits upload. However, only 59.4% of these households adopt broadband. And there's some major barriers. You might wonder why, if you have access, why wouldn't you adopt? There's some major barriers to access. Chief among them is access. If you don't have access, you can't subscribe to the internet in your home. However, cost is the second major barrier. So the cost of the service itself is a huge barrier to families across the state. In addition, the cost of devices, so the computers, the laptops, the technologies that we use to connect to the internet, many homes can't afford those. And if you don't have a computer, why would you subscribe to the internet? Also, digital literacy, or rather the lack of digital literacy skills. The internet and the computer can be quite difficult to use. And so if you don't have those skills, it can be intimidating and there might not be a reason for you to subscribe to the internet. And lastly, over the years, a term that's popped up in research is called relevancy. So not really seeing how the internet is relevant to your daily lives. I will say, in a post-COVID world, I do anticipate that this fourth little square or hexagon will drop off the radar. I believe everyone today sees how the internet is relevant to their lives and really needs it.
Yeah, you started to talk earlier about some of the numbers, and you mentioned that there is pretty high availability, theoretical availability. And these are the FCC numbers on that, but there's some questions about that data, but there's also an adoption challenge that we have, and that has to do with affordability or possibly the perception of relevance. Can you maybe talk through some of these numbers?
Yes. So as I mentioned, 94.97% of our households have access to broadband at 25 megabits download, 3 megabits upload. I will say about 95% of the households that don't have it live in the rural areas that don't have the access. This data is from the FCC, and as you alluded to, there are some challenges with it. We know it's not perfect, but it's the best data we have at this moment. That's a whole nother conversation that we could have. In terms of adoption, 59.4% of our households subscribe at 25 megabits download, 3 megabits upload. Another 12.6% of households across the state don't have access to any computer device at all. That includes a smartphone. And 5.9% rely only on a smartphone. So they use smartphone for everything. And I don't know about you, Leslie, but I don't like writing an email on my smartphone, much less a memo or a homework assignment or doing remote learning on it. We just don't think that that's sufficient for operating in today's world.
Can you talk a little bit more about the 59.4 and just kind of explain what that means? That means if you do have access, among those who have access, a little less than 60% of people actually subscribe. And what do you think's behind that? Is that an affordability issue or is it a relevance issue?
That data, the 59.4% figure comes from the FCC. The American Community Survey also gives us data in terms of adoption across the state or subscription. The 59.4%, they may have access, they may not. We don't know why they aren't subscribing. The FCC doesn't ask that question, nor does the ACS. But our research, our personal research and research from across the country shows that it typically boils down to cost of the service, cost of the device, or not having a device at all, not having the skills and or relevancy. So we would suspect that the bulk of the reason why those folks aren't adopting is cost, either of the service or the device.
We're seeing a slide now that shows, it's sort of a heat map slide that shows where adoption rates are lowest by census tract. If people want to find out more about digital inclusion in their county, how do they do that? How do they find out what their specific situation is if they don't know?
Absolutely. We have a couple really robust tools on our website, so ncbroadband.gov. We have these things called indices that we developed with a researcher from Purdue University, Roberto Chiardo, who was at your event in February. This specific index is the North Carolina Broadband Adoption Potential Index. This data right here that you're looking at is by census tract. We also have it at the county level, so anyone can go in and look up their county. You can also go into the census tract data and look at your county and see a more granular picture of your county. These indices are, this specific index has 11 factors that make up the scores for an individual census tract. The counties have the same 11 factors, but they're at the county level. And basically, these are the things that we think, and the researcher in Purdue thinks, impact a community's ability to subscribe to the internet. This is a great tool to help you target solutions, right? So an individual, one of the communities that's faring poorly, might have a high population of seniors, ages 65 plus, that seniors tend to be slower to adopt these technologies. And that doesn't mean you should just forget about your senior population. That means you could use this tool to then target that population and say, well, we need to, what our digital inclusion program needs to be, it really needs to be around equipping our seniors. Things like that. That's how we hope folks will use this tool to form programs that actually help the people in their communities that need it most.
So if people are trying to gather information about what's going on in their county, they've got the data that you have available. They've got the FCC data, which I'm already seeing in chat. People are consistently disappointed in the accuracy of that.
Don't worry, we are too.
But also, are there any other populations that are consistently undercounted? One person in chat is noting that immigrant populations may be undercounted. How would you gather maybe county-specific data that's not showing up in your database, or is there a way around that?
Sure. So the availability data is actually provided by the internet service providers themselves. So that is undercounted in a different way, not based on the population there. So access data wouldn't necessarily be inhibited by undercounted populations. Availability data may, or adoption data may be undercounted because that is data from the American Community Survey. So what we say is that these indices and the national data sets that are provided to us from these two major sources are your starting place. They're not your endpoint, right? They're your starting place. So you start with these data sets, and then you go out and you do your own survey, which actually we have a survey we'd be happy to help you, your communities use and partner with us to gather better data. Or you talk to folks in your community and find out what their needs are. And again, we can help you through that process. We have a team of folks that are specialized in doing that. But yeah, you know your community better than we do. You know your community better than the federal government data sources do. So you know where to go to find the information you need.
All right. Talk about the Broadband Infrastructure Office's relationship with IEI on Band NC. Why do you think this program is important, and what do you hope will be the outcome?
It's so important, Leslie, and it's so exciting. For those of y'all on this call, in this webinar, this is the first type of program of this sort that I'm aware of, first in the state, definitely, and potentially in the country. There are some digital inclusion funding programs that come from cities. I'm not aware of any that are quite like this. So we're first in future, we're first in flight, we're now first in digital inclusion. I think this is really exciting. And second, there's a lot of funding that goes towards increasing broadband access from the federal government. We have our own state grant program for that. There's no dedicated funding for digital inclusion. Folks in the digital inclusion field are scrappy, and they've found lots of funding pots that they then use to create digital inclusion programs. but there's no dedicated funding. And so it's really exciting that now we have some digital inclusion funding for folks to do digital inclusion specific projects in their communities. And third, we're just so excited to work with IEI. Y'all are wonderful partners. It's a dream team. You guys are so excellent at what you do. And for everyone on the call, we're really lucky to partner with them, and you'll be really lucky to partner with them as well.
All right. Well, we're lucky to have one of the two digital inclusion specialists in the country as our principal partner. Amy Huffman, thank you for being with us. Definitely coming back to you in a little bit, but really just wanted to move ahead into the program itself. There's some information on our website, obviously, but really wanted to bring in Maggie Woods, who's running the program for the Institute for Emerging Issues. Why don't you start maybe by describing what Band NC is and what the goal is?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Leslie. I'm really excited to be here today talking to you about Band NC, and I'm honored to be on the same webinar as Amy and her office. Y'all have been such great partners. So Band NC is a digital inclusion project. Our goal is to equip counties to meet needs and build more digitally equitable communities. And ultimately, our vision is to make North Carolina the first state in the nation where all counties have a digital inclusion plan in place. And the way that Band NC works is it's basically 2 grant cycles with some technical assistance and workshops sandwiched in between those 2 grant cycles. So the first grant cycle is open right now. We are providing 30 rapid response community integration grants. These grants are for $5,000 a piece. And they will be granted on a rolling basis. And this morning, we're going to spend the majority of our time talking about these grants and how you can apply and answering your questions on that. But this fall, we're really excited because we're teaming up with the Broadband Infrastructure Office to provide technical assistance workshops on how to build your own digital inclusion plan in your county. So all grantees who are awarded the grants over the summer are invited to participate in these technical assistance workshops, but they'll also be open up to others. And what's particularly exciting about these workshops is that if you put together a digital inclusion plan, then in spring 2021, we will have another 30 grants to provide implementation funding for your digital inclusion plan. And those will be given on a competitive basis. So again, we have 2 grant cycles over the course of the next year, and we're really excited about them.
All right. Can you walk through the application process for these rapid response community grants?
Yeah, absolutely. So the process is fairly simple. You should be able to access the application online. It's a Google form, and then you attach a PDF of the application. We do have applications instructions on our website, and we'll be linking to that a little bit later in the program today. The application itself, so that PDF document, should include a narrative that's no more than 2 pages, single space, 12-point font. It'll also include a cover page, which we provide a template for, as well as a very simple budget. And so I actually, Leslie, if it's okay, want to walk through each of these materials that is needed and kind of walk through the narrative first. So if we could get the narrative slide up for everyone to look at. So the narrative should include these 4 components. It should include a description of the proposed digital inclusion project. So tell us about the project, who it will serve, any gaps that it will fill, and you know, how it will meet unmet needs. And you'll see that I highlighted what gaps from other funding will this address. We know that a lot of funding is coming down the line. I've seen people talk about it in the chat. We want to make sure that this funding is not duplicative, because we know that there is a lot of funding coming down the line, but it's not filling in all the gaps. So as best to your knowledge, how is this funding from BandNC helping to fill gaps that isn't being addressed by other funding? The second part of the narrative we want you to address is partners and local engagement. So what community partners are collaborating with you on this effort? Or what partners do you think of as champions for digital inclusion in your community? Because that can be really important. This could include local government entities. It could include education institutions, so schools, community colleges, universities. It might include businesses, internet service providers, nonprofits, faith groups and churches, or others that aren't listed here. Those are just some examples of who you might partner with. And I will just note, you'll see that this is highlighted as well, that if you are not a government agency, please indicate who you're working with in local government. We think this is really important, especially since our ultimate goal is to ensure that all counties are putting together a strategy for digital inclusion and digital equity. We want to make sure that you're partnering with local government institutions. We also want to hear about what your intended outcomes and metrics are for the grant. So what does success look like for you? How do you define that? And then discuss any potential barriers you might come across as well. So that's what we're looking for the narrative. And if we could move on to talk about the budget. We're really looking for a simple budget here. One page, and highlighting the following categories. And we ask for these categories simply because this is what NC State asks for us. And so it allows us to kind of speed up the process on the back end. So some of these are really self-explanatory, like payroll. Others might be a little bit wonky using NC State terms. So if you look at current services, that can encompass a lot of different things: communications, utilities, repairs, advertising. If at any moment you don't understand what you need to include in the budget, please reach out to me and we'll work through it together. But please try to put them in these categories.
Maggie, just to be clear on that, the
Yep.
entry on some of these categories could be zero. I mean, it's not suggesting there needs to be a number other than zero in some of these categories, right?
Absolutely, yes. Many of the categories might be zero. You'll notice one of the categories is travel, and that just might not be something that's possible right now. Maybe it is, but absolutely. One thing I'll note, Leslie, is just that we also ask if there's any leveraged funding. This is not a requirement, but we do like to see that there is a match or some funding that's leveraged from your community. And so if there is, please include that funding as well.
All right, I'm sure we'll get back to some more of the details about that. Could you maybe talk a little bit about eligibility? There have already been some questions in the chat. We've been talking about county level applications, but can you clarify who could be the applicant?
Yeah, absolutely. And I see that Sandy asks, does a county have to apply, or can it be a town or nonprofit to be the applicant? Absolutely. So nonprofits, government institutions, schools, colleges, universities, churches can all apply. We do ask that you involve the county in some way. And the reason for this is that we are only funding one applicant per county. And so if an applicant from a county applies and is funded and someone else from that same county applies, we will be sure to put you in touch with each other, but it's best if there's some coordination if the county government knows that people are applying to this. I'll say that if you are a regional group, you can also apply on behalf of a group of counties or a tribal area.
There are also some cases in which the county is going to be the best source for knowing how funding is flowing down, or the school system is a good source for knowing how funding is flowing down, or the federal grant to the IMSL or IMLS, they might know. The community college might know how it's using its funds. And so by being in touch with them, you also get a sense of what elements are covered and which ones aren't being covered, so you can really identify those gaps.
Absolutely. It ensures that the funding is not duplicative. And I will say we're working with Amy's team on putting together a list of where funding is going across the state to better help you figure out where funding might be going in your county and where gaps are.
What are are some examples of digital inclusion projects? What do we mean when we talk about a project?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And the answer is it depends, and we want to hear from you. But we have included a list of possible projects that you might be interested in. So that could include gathering data. You saw there was a bunch of questions in the chat when Amy was talking through the data. We know the data is not perfect on this issue. And so if working with their office or with others on gathering better data for your county makes the most sense for you, that could be a project. It could be purchasing devices such as tablets, laptops, individual hotspots. I will note that we know a lot of funding is coming, particularly for the K-12 system to support the purchase of devices. So again, we'd want to make sure that that was filling in gaps where funding is not already going to, but certainly could be a project that makes sense for your county. It could also mean offering digital inclusion skills or literacy classes, providing technical assistance for remote learners or workers or seniors in your communities. It could also be paying for the time of a digital navigator. This is a new term in the field. It's similar to a healthcare navigator, but it's someone who's providing guidance for how to get connected and use digital skills or devices. This could also be funding subscription subsidies. We know, as Amy discussed, that one of the biggest barriers to people using the internet is the cost. Internet is expensive. And so could you set up a fund in your community to subsidize for the cost of internet for low-income families? It could also be staff time or consulting services if there's a specific need that you have, or other projects related to digital inclusion. And I will reiterate, if you're not sure if your project is related enough to digital inclusion, please reach out and we will provide some guidance. But don't take these kind of 7 examples as the only things that you can do. Like Leslie said earlier, you know your county better than we do. And so there might be something else that we're not thinking about that's innovative and different that makes sense for you.
We're going to try to come to all the questions, although a lot of them are coming in and we may miss some by the end, but just one along the way. Someone's trying to come up with a snappy summary of this, and their suggestion is phase 1 is for planning, phase 2 is for implementation. And I would say, just from my perspective, phase 1 is for a little bit more than planning, but can you maybe describe a little bit more about what you think phase 1 is for?
Yeah, that's a good question. I see that coming in from Kimberly here. Phase 1 is really to get some work done in your county. And in the sense of planning, it's to help build excitement and community around this issue, but it's really meant to help address real needs in the county. The second phase is absolutely around implementation of a digital inclusion plan. And again, those will be workshops that take place in the fall. But phase 1 is really about coalescing around the issue, getting something done, and getting a group of partners together so that hopefully you can attend these workshops in the fall and then ultimately create a plan and receive funding to implement that plan.
Okay. Again, trying to keep up with these questions. I'm going to try to write them down and come to them at the end. Amy and Maggie, if you see them along the way, please flag them also so we make sure we answer as many as we can. Talk about expectations of grantees, Maggie.
Yep, the expectations are really simple. You're required to submit a 1 to 2 page report by November 30th describing how you used the Band NC funds. That would also include a budget for how you use the funds. And then, like we've talked about, you're highly encouraged to attend the series of workshops this fall. And then hopefully you'll apply for the implementation grant in the spring. And I do see a question in here asking if a county can apply to receive the grant in phase 1 and in phase 2. Absolutely. So you could receive a grant over the summer, attend the workshops, and then apply to receive the grant in phase 2. So you ultimately could receive funding in both phases. You could also decide not to apply for the summer grant and just apply for phase 2. You could also receive funding then and vice versa, just apply for the summer grant.
And receiving a summer grant does not disadvantage you in applying for a spring grant.
No, absolutely not.
All right, so if someone's interested in applying, what are the next steps?
Yeah, so the application instructions are on our website. They're fairly thorough, so please take a look at them. And as you put together your application, please ensure that you're engaging community partners, especially local government. Then you can fill out the online form, submit your single PDF of the application. If at any time you have questions, you can reach out to me. My email's here. It'll also be at the end of this program, and it's on our website. So please, I'm here to be a resource to you throughout this process. And applications will be accepted on a rolling basis through August 31st. We as a committee are planning to meet every 3 weeks. And so with that, it's a goal of getting you an answer within a month of applying. And if you are funded, you'll immediately hear from our business manager who will have some forms for you to fill out. And we are a state agency. It can take a little bit of time to get funds to you, but we're aiming to make sure you get funds within a month of being told that you will be funded.
Right. Lots of questions. Again, it's possible I've missed some. If we appear to be getting deep into the questions and you haven't heard yours, could I just maybe ask that you resubmit it? So let me start trying to go through these, and Amy and Maggie just proactively bring up any that you noticed. Amy, I wonder maybe if you could early on just try to identify in the broadest strokes what other sorts of funding there is coming down. I mentioned the museum money that came through the CARES Act, and just wondering what other kind of categories of funding people might see coming into their counties that they might not be aware of. Yeah,
sure. And there is a new pandemic response office in the state. It's NC Pro, so NC Pandemic Response Office. I'm sure we can find the link and drop it in the chat. They're tracking funding from the federal funds for COVID response that are going to counties and things of that nature. So that's a great place to check it out in terms of all the funding that's not just dedicated towards digital inclusion stuff. In terms of digital inclusion, let's start with IMLS. So that's the Institute for Museum and Library Services. There was a federal application due last Friday for funds directly from them. So I heard of a number of folks across the state applying for that. So there's that funding, and I think the eligible applicants were libraries and museums. Any of y'all that are libraries on this call, mark your calendars for July 15th. That is the state deadline for the funding that came from IMLS to the state library. We can also drop a link to that in the chat as well. I'm keeping Kirsten busy. They have a couple different grant programs that they're using the federal funding for. One's called an Easy Grant, Easy, and then another is a project-based. I'd recommend checking those out, emailing them, seeing what types of projects they're looking for, but they're looking for digital inclusion projects as well. So that's a great opportunity for everyone on the call that are libraries or museums, or you partner with libraries already, or if you don't, I recommend partnering with the library system. The second big pot of funding you might have heard of is from the Federal Department of Education. And there's funding coming down from that the General Assembly has allocated to our Department of Public Instruction, which is our education department. There's funding available to them for purchasing hotspot devices for students who don't have access at home. And then also computers for students and faculty that don't have computers. And I think there's also funding for hotspots for faculty or teachers who don't have access as well. I will say right now that looks like that funding is going to be oversubscribed. So there may still be a need in your community, but it will be very important for you to talk with your school system to see how big that need is, if that's what you're looking at. In addition, that funding for those hotspot devices, it's our understanding that it cannot be used for the month-to-month payment of the service itself. So that may be something that you'd like to talk with your local school system on helping them figure that out. They may be using different funding from the CARES Act for that. They may not have a source for that. So that's going to vary from district to district. And then finally, there's some different telehealth pots of funding. If you're interested in telehealth, there's funding at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the FCC. Those are grants being accepted now. Here's a couple different programs we can provide information on if you're interested in telehealth. And then there's also Department of Commerce, the Economic Development Administration, EDA, has funding available as well. It can go to broadband or planning, particularly planning would be what would be most relevant here in North Carolina.
Lots of questions. Thank you, Amy. Lots of questions about regional applications. Maggie, I know that's something you've given a lot of thought to, and it's an approach that's being taken in northeastern North Carolina by Roanoke Electric, that they're thinking that it probably makes sense to pool applications across counties. How will those be treated?
Yeah, so we definitely encourage regional applications for this summer round of grants. And so that could be a council of government, could be other regional groups. If you are applying for a region, you can ask for $5,000 per county that you're applying for. And there's just a couple stipulations. We'd ask that, let's say you're applying on behalf of 3 counties. So just make sure that each county is receiving $5,000. It's not one county is receiving 7 and the other is receiving 8. So just make sure that you're dividing it equally and that the counties are aware that you're doing it and involved in the planning. We want to make sure that you're just not applying on their behalf without engaging them. I do see a question here from Ben about how do you feel about a group of counties sharing a digital inclusion plan? So this is kind of moving into that second cycle of funding in the spring as well as the workshops this fall. And I would say that it's not something we're opposed to. It's not something that we've seen before nationally, but that doesn't mean it couldn't work in your context and in your region. And like Leslie mentioned, in northeastern North Carolina with Roanoke Electric support, it's looking like that's probably the route that they will move towards. So we're certainly open to that and would love to have a longer conversation with you on it. Amy, I don't know if you'd add to that at all in terms of regional digital inclusion plans.
I think it's something we should look at on a case-by-case basis. So yeah, I agree with you, Maggie.
Yeah.
All right. We already answered, I think, one of the questions that came in about whether someone who receives a grant during round 1 could also get one during round 2. Answer is yes. Yes. Could be eligible for both. Several questions about what happens when the money runs out. So based on interest today, I think that is a possibility over the summer. How do you handle that, Maggie?
Yeah, so we're really interested in funding a diverse group of counties and in funding counties that have the most need. And so we'll be looking at a range of factors, so not just the criteria that are in the application, but what are the key needs that the community has, and the diversity of applicants across who we receive. And so it's a hard question to answer. I will say there is incentive to put together your application sooner rather than later, since it is a rolling application. But but we may end up funding through August 31st. And so we're looking at a range of factors.
All right. Earlier, there was a long question, and I wasn't able to read it all just because I was also trying to pay attention to what you guys were saying. But it had to do with the idea of using, I think, public buildings as amplifiers of Wi-Fi hotspots. They mentioned particularly fire and emergency services. And this is a concept that some people have expressed to me as the any roam approach, where there's kind of a series of concentric circles of broadband that is offered perhaps out of public buildings, whether it's school buildings or downtown buildings or others. Is that something that would be eligible for this program, or is it something that people should be aware of?
I would say yes. I'd like to talk to people about it a little bit more, but my gut would be yes. My sense is that this might be more expensive than what $5,000 could support. And so if that helps leverage funding, then that could certainly be a possibility. I don't know, Amy, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, that can get a little complicated very quickly. Depending on the building that's being leveraged, particularly if it's a school or a library, there are a lot of federal regulations around that. If that school or library has E-rate, which is, again, an entirely different conversation. So that would be a pretty complicated project, I think, and could get pretty sticky pretty quickly.
So if that's something you're thinking about, why don't you reach out to us and we can have a conversation.
Bob Taylor earlier helpfully typed in the NC Pandemic Response Office URL. You can see it in the chat if you're listening. If you're instead listening to the recording, it's nc.gov/agencies/NCPRO. And that's the group that is really trying to keep up with the range of funding that's coming down as part of the pandemic response. So that's nc.gov/agencies/NCPRO. Interested in having both of you talk about, we've said we're interested in hearing more about other funding that you are leveraging as part of this. And again, that's not a requirement for this. It does help us a little bit to have a sense of how you're triaging and coordinating things. And it's also encouraging. One thing we're hoping is that additional funders will join as word gets out about this and add some additional funding. And so it's helpful to be able to say, you know, this funding's going out, but it's leveraging an additional amount of funding. So essentially your money is going further. So it's mostly helpful to us as we try to talk to additional funders about investing in this program. This program can also be used in a small way to match other applications that you might be moving forward. You can show the efforts that you're giving here, and that in some cases is going to be able to help you show matching efforts to complement other things that you're applying for. All right. Other questions, Amy or Maggie, that you have seen that we have not talked about?
I saw a few about mapping in our survey, so I'll touch on that quickly. So our survey is live, but we're doing a slow rollout, and we'll make a big announcement later. But if any of you are interested in partnering with us and using our survey, we'd love for you to do that. It includes a speed test. The online version includes a speed test so that we can get accurate data on who has different that speeds that are under 25.3. We are using that data. Somebody also asked a question about creating better maps. We're using that data to create better maps so that we can take that data to the federal government and use it for our own grant program to inform where the actual unserved areas are from across the state. So we find that it's very important to have accurate data. And we also find that it's very important to have a standardized survey, because otherwise we can't combine different data responses from different surveys. So we'd love for you to use our survey. We also have a version that's over the phone, so someone can call in and report that they don't have service, or text it in, so that folks that don't have service, it's hard to complete a survey online when you don't have service. It's also mobile friendly. So very excited about that. That's a great tool. It's free. You do not have to pay us to use it. You do not have to pay with us to partner with you on it. But we would love to, I see a contact for a question from Chris. You can contact me about getting access to these tools, and we'll work with you. We have a team of folks who work with folks across the state in these types of ways. And a representative in each county that coordinates with the state broadband office. We have a team of folks that work across the state. If you contact me, I can get you in contact with the right person. But for all of the band and C related questions, those will come through me in our office.
Maggie, other questions that you've seen come in that you'd like to take on?
I see that, well, this is a comment. Amanda said that they would like to participate in the survey. So if Amy, you note her email, and we can grab all the questions from this. I think those are, I don't think I've seen any other questions come in. I'll just note, you know, because we're only funding one per county, it is possible that someone will already have applied if you apply from your county. And we're going to try to be really intentional about putting groups together that are applying from the same county. Again, we can, you know, encourage coordination on the front end, but we don't all know everything that's happening. So we'll work hard to put you in touch if we're hearing from others from your county as well.
All right, just trying to keep up with these. Who do we contact to get access to the NCDIT tools, Amy?
Me, and Kirsten just added my email into the chat.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I'm a few questions behind. All right.
There are some questions about getting access to internet in rural areas. And I know that's not a main focus of Band and C, but I don't know, Amy, if you have any anything to add maybe about the GREAT program and others. There's been a couple people who have responded to that.
Yeah, so that is a good question. And I sort of alluded to that there's funding for extending access in the state earlier, but I wasn't very specific. So there's federal funding for extending access to unserved areas. There's also state funding, and that funding is from our General Assembly, and it comes through our office in a program called the Growing Rural Economies with Access with Access to Technology. The acronym is GREAT. Last year, we awarded roughly $10 million in grants to internet service providers. They are the eligible applicants to extend service to unserved areas. Those projects are underway right now. We're excited about them. We're currently about to award another 15 million. Applications are being reviewed right now. And those are projects will be probably across the state. They were for tier 1 counties initially for the first 2 funding rounds. This summer, they'll open up to tier 2 counties as well. There's a lot of activity right now at the General Assembly regarding the grant, so it could change a little bit. But in general, the eligible applicants are internet service providers. We do encourage them to partner with their local communities to find out where the unserved areas are. They are to go to extend service to unserved areas.
And there's a link to the URL for the GREAT program there. A lot of new money has come into that in the past session. And there's also some federal money that's related to access. I would say this program is a big fan of access and a huge supporter of access. But in terms of the big number of dollars that are going to be needed to make the rest of that available, that's more likely to come through something like the GREAT program or through new approaches like a satellite approach. that we see. So we're focused proportionally more on adoption and devices and filling in the gaps once that access is there to make sure that you are able to actually take advantage of the access that you have, can afford it, and have the right devices to be able to take advantage of it.
Leslie, there's a couple questions about laws, and if I could, I'll can I address those quickly? So we didn't talk about the laws that restrict efforts because there aren't many that restrict digital inclusion efforts that are what Leslie's talking about, getting computers and skills and all the things that prevent adoption. There are regulations that prevent extending access. And so there are things to know around in that realm. But with $5,000, solving frankly, $1 billion problem in the state, we think that these grants can go towards more digital inclusion efforts, that's where they'll be most effective. But if anyone is interested in talking legalese with me, they're welcome to reach out.
All right, Maggie, let me ask you to just sort of make a plea for why this matters. And I'm guessing everybody on this call appreciates this, but can you maybe in your own words give some kind of summary about why digital inclusion matters for the people of North Carolina?
Yeah, well, to Amy's point earlier, I think the issue of relevancy is no longer an issue, but I will say even 6 months ago when we were talking about, bringing together people around the issue of digital inclusion, I got a lot of skepticism. And now, given the pandemic, it's really clear to people why access to the internet, why access to a computer or a device that meets your needs matter. Because if you are stuck at home and you don't have access to the internet, you can't do your homework, you can't work remotely, you can't apply for benefits. I was just talking to the head of a credit union yesterday, and he talked about how hard it is for particularly senior populations and in many of the rural communities that they support, how they can't even access their bank accounts. They can't get money. And they were too afraid to go out to banks because they were older and more at risk. So digital inclusion matters in so many ways, making sure people have the skills to use the internet and to use the devices. They have the devices that they need, and they have access and are adopting high-speed internet.
Amy, your thoughts? Why does digital inclusion matter?
Because frankly, without it, every North Carolinian isn't going to flourish or thrive in the 21st century. And that's what we want. We want every North Carolinian to be able to access the tools, the resources, the commodities, the innovation, the opportunities that the internet provides. And without the skills, without the devices, without affordable access, they won't be able to do so. And so we just think it's absolutely essential to address these challenges now while we can, so that every North Carolinian can thrive and flourish.
Thank you, Amy, and thanks to the North Carolina Broadband Infrastructure Office for their leadership on this and for joining us in this project. We'd also like to thank our sponsors, the John M. Belk Endowment, the Roanoke Electric Cooperatives, North Carolina Electric Cooperatives, and ATMC, all the folks who are responsible for making these grants possible. Our role is to administer them and cheerlead for them and help you develop plans so that slowly, bit by bit, piece by piece, every county in North Carolina develops a strategy that enables the people there to have that kind of access in an equitable way so that children and adults can learn from home. People have the opportunity, the legitimate opportunity to work from home so that seniors don't have to worry about going out for the things that can be handled by telehealth or the banking that can be done by telebanking. All those things become available at the point that we have thoughtful approaches to digital inclusion, and that enables everybody have a chance at being more successful and for our people to be more productive and happy. So thanks to all of you who are participating and will participate in this program. Thanks for the leadership that you'll show in bringing together coalitions of people who share different perspectives on this, but a common commitment. So we thank you for caring about this program and your interest in extending broadband to more people and making it more widely accessible. If you have questions going forward, we ask that you reach out to us through emergingissues.org. There will be information, FAQs, other things related to that. If you have other specific questions, please reach out to Amy. You've seen her email, or to Maggie Woods, who is mjwoods@ncsu.edu. Again, thanks for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing from you.